There's something fishy about that guy. Sometimes in retro gaming there's a title that I really want to cover here on GameHammer. Today's episode is all about one such title. It's a classic, and justifiably so, but it's also a Christmas game, so I've waited several months to be able to bring this to you. So today, let's look at the amazing James Pond 2 Robocod. I first encountered this on the Mega Drive. A childhood friend of mine was playing it one school holiday when I popped round to visit him. A couple of friends were already there, and we all ended up crowded around his parents' TV, entranced by this fun game. It was bright, it was simple to get to grips with, it was fun. It was also hard as nails. I couldn't beat the game back then, and I still can't. There's a great deal of challenge here, and that's why I can always come back to it without feeling like I'm retreading old ground. I like playing it. It's like a classic arcade game. You always want to get that little bit further on. So what's the plot? Well, it's fairly simple. Dr. Maybe has kidnapped a bunch of penguins and all of Santa's presents, and the only person who can save Christmas is the famous Piscine spy James Pond. He's outfitted with a new cyborg body, and he's been given the codename Robocod, hence the wonderful remix of the Robocop theme tune that plays as the game's title theme. It's best if you get used to hearing that tune because it won't go away. I've got it playing in my head right now, and I've not been playing this game for hours by this point. It just doesn't go away. Anyway, back to the plot of the game. Why are you rescuing penguins? Well, it's simple. Penguin had a sponsorship deal with the game, and they actually have an advert in the intro sequence. I kid you not. Well, if Zool can advertise Chupa Chups lollies, anything goes in gaming. So, with that brash advert out of the way, how does the game play? Really well. James is easy to control, albeit a little slippery when trying to navigate small spaces. He has a little bit of momentum when you try to stop moving, like Mario, but only worse. It takes a little while to get used to that, but once you work him out, the game is a lot of fun. There are 5 main controls. Left and right to navigate the levels, a jump button, a stretch button that elongates James's body and makes it possible to reach very high places, and a drop attack button where James collapses inside his metal shell and lands heavily on enemies. That's how you defeat your foes in this game, by landing on them like an anvil. It's a typical platformer attack, but with a fun twist. Developed in only 9 months, around 4 months longer than the original game, and programmed first on the Amiga, James Pond 2 is an abstract, cartoony game that met with creator Chris Sorrell's view that realism in games during the 8 and 16-bit eras just didn't work very well. Hence James Pond is a cartoon rather than more realistic spy. This idea definitely worked, and James Pond stood up well against all the other cartoon mascots of the time. We're going to take a look at the Amiga version in a moment, but for now I want to focus on the Mega Drive incarnation because it's the version that I played as a kid. This version of the game wasn't coded by Sorrell. Instead, the game was ported by a new recruit to the Millennium team using a custom modded Apple Mac that Millennium's founder Steve Back brought back to the UK after securing a Mega Drive publishing deal with Electronic Arts. This Mac was modded by EA to work as their own custom development kit for the Mega Drive and Genesis games, rather than using Sega-made development tools. So that's pretty cool, and also indicative of why EA was a company that you wanted to work with back then, rather than being a name to run away from as they are now. According to an interview with Chris Sorrell on Sega 16, the Mega Drive version of the game was coded alongside his Amiga original by Simon Pashley, who had only 8 months to put the game together due to a shorter development schedule for the Mega Drive version. Sorrell recalls that several corners had to be cut for the Mega Drive version, such as losing the extra month of development time that allowed the Amiga version to have custom sprites and copper gradient effects for its backgrounds. As a result, the Mega Drive version has palette-swapped sprites on its background textures, which personally I don't mind because it looks pretty decent, but does it hold up against the Amiga original? Well, we'll see about that later on. There are 50 levels to work your way through, most of them grouped into themed sets, such as teddy bears and sweeties, and you'll move between the levels by navigating your way around a giant mansion in the North Pole. It's in some of the rooms in this giant mansion that you'll have to battle giant bosses too, and I do mean giant. They really are huge. Take this teddy bear for example. He's using up most of the screen. And not just that, but he's animated fluidly. I love the way they've done this. The bright colours, fun gameplay and brilliant music make the game a delight to play. It's one of those games that, even though it's themed around Christmas, it doesn't feel like it's a game that you'll only want to play during the festive season. The Mega Drive version may not have had the extra month that the Amiga got to polish it properly, but it's still a solid game in its own right. As I said earlier, it's the first version of this game that I ever played, and I have just as much fun coming back to it now as I did back in the early 90s when I first got to give it a try. But how does its little cousin hold up? Which little cousin? Well, James Bond 2, like a lot of major games at the time, got ported to pretty much every single console on the market, so consequently there's a version of the game for the 8-bit console from Sega, the Master System. Let's give it a try now. The Master System is nowhere near as powerful a machine as its Mega Drive successor, but that doesn't mean it can't hold its own in the gaming department. James Bond 2 on the Master System demonstrates that beautifully. This is a brilliant port. It runs very fast, it's very responsive, and it looks beautiful. The palette swap backgrounds are gone from the levels, replaced with basic textures, and as a result, the game looks great. Everything is clear, and nothing gets hidden by the background. The main sprites look lovely, and the music is great too. It may lack a bit of the Mega Drive's pizzazz, but this is still a solid game that's a pleasure to play. I'm really impressed with this version. Now, okay, the number of levels is clearly cut down. There's only one zone behind the first door for a start, and each themed area has one, maybe two of the levels from the Mega Drive version, which as a result means it's a much quicker game to make your way through than its big brother. Now yeah, I realise the Master System carts don't hold as much data as the Mega Drive ones, and I'm impressed with the quality of what they managed to put into this game, but even so, losing so much of the game hurts. There's also one other quibble that I had with the game, and it's the replacement of Bertie Bassett with a generic gingerbread man. I dislike that mostly because the design just doesn't fit as well with the aesthetics of the game in my view, but aside from this little problem and the missing levels, the game is great, and if you're a fan of the Master System, this one is one to look out for. I wish I could say the same about the Game Gear version. If you watch previous episodes of GameHammer, you know I love my Game Gear. It was my first handheld console, and I adore it to this day. But James Bond 2 on the Game Gear does not do the console justice. The Game Gear is essentially a slightly enhanced Master System with a tiny screen stuck to it. Most games ported to the Game Gear therefore use the Master System as a basis for the port, and they try to code around the tiny screen. Sometimes coders make use of the Game Gear's enhanced graphics palette, but other times they don't. James Bond 2 is one of those that, unless I'm missing something here, doesn't enhance the colour palette. It's not a problem. The game is bright and cheerful already, and I love the graphics. It's the way that they've handled the small screen that's the problem. The coders here haven't shrunk the sprites, they're just as big as they were on the Master System. Instead, they've shrunk the visible area of the screen, and they haven't introduced a way of scrolling around to get an idea of what's going on just outside your very small field of vision. As a result, the game becomes a problem to play. Right from the first level, you have to navigate across a spike pit by holding onto the ceiling. When you grab the ceiling, the floor disappears off the bottom of the screen. Can you guess how far along you have to climb before you can drop down safely? I couldn't. On the Master System and the Mega Drive, you could see objects sitting on the floor which let you navigate this bit. It wasn't a problem. It was just an obstacle to get past. On the Game Gear, it's a guessing game. Problems like this persist throughout the game. It's a huge factor in how the game simply isn't anywhere near as much fun to play as the other Sega ports, and that's a big shame because without this issue, the game would have been a solid addition to the Game Gear's library. One thing the Game Gear does have over its Master System counterpart, however, is the levels. The Game Gear has more of the original levels from the Mega Drive version, so there's no one level then done in the first zone here. This was quite a surprise when playing this version. I wasn't expecting to see so much game crammed onto the Game Gear's little cartridge. So let's compare the different ports on the Sega systems. I think in the first place has to be the Mega Drive version. It's amazing! It's as close to the Amiga version as you're going to get, and it's a lot of fun to play. I loved it in the 90s and I love it now, but which system takes second place is quite a difficult choice. On the one hand, the Master System looks pretty good and it plays really well, but it's lacking a fair amount of levels, and that makes it a bit of a problem to try and pick that one. On the other hand, the Game Gear has the levels, but it has a very small screen area, and that makes it a lot more annoying to play. So in the end, what comes second depends on what you actually want from the game. Do you want to play all the levels in 8-bit form at the expense of some screen real estate? Or do you want to actually be able to see what's going on? It's up to you to decide at the end of the day. For my part, even though I love the Game Gear so much, I'm going to have to go with the Master System because, let's face it, being able to see what's going on, I'll take that over extra levels any day. So, with Sega out the way, let's see how the Nintendo ports held up. We'll start with the Game Boy. The Game Boy got around the screen real estate problem from the Game Gear by shrinking the sprites instead of the visible game area. As a result, we get a horrible low-resolution mess. My Game Boy is a Game Boy Color, so I don't have the ghosting problem the original system had, but I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to try to play this game with these horrible-looking but fast-moving sprites on a screen filled with motion blur. I would not be surprised to hear that it was unplayable without having to stop every few minutes to check your bearings. The music, however, is amazing. Just listen to that soundtrack. Nintendo consoles always have amazing sound, and Super James Bond on the Game Boy shows that off very nicely. It's brilliant. The levels are all here, as far as I could tell. I couldn't play the game all the way through because the controls aren't quite right. They just don't feel as responsive as on the other systems. And there's an annoying change to the game mechanics where you seem to have to land on the snakes at just the right point, otherwise you can't kill them. It makes progressing in the game a bit more difficult when you're used to the other systems. Also, some of the items are in different locations in this version. It's not a big deal, and it certainly won't stop you from being able to play the game, but it's worth noting for completeness' sake. All in all, the Game Boy version is complete and it's decent when giving it a try, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you're not going to play it on the original dot matrix Game Boy, because I cannot for the life of me see this being enjoyable with motion blur. James Bond moves too fast, as do his enemies, for the screen on that system to be able to keep up. Play it on a later handheld or the Super Game Boy or something like that, it will make things a lot better. The Super Nintendo version is brilliant. Sometimes there seems to be a little bit of slowdown, or at least longer pauses when transitioning between levels, but on the whole it's a brilliant port of the game. I love the sound, it's fantastic, as you would expect from the SNES, and the graphics are lovely too. Okay, sometimes the bright and colourful backgrounds get in the way of the game by making important parts of the level a bit difficult to notice, such as when the blue roof blocks that you can grab onto are essentially invisible because the background blends into them. And the scrolling texture on the end of level score screen is a headache-inducing mess, but aside from that, it's a wonderfully vibrant game. It sometimes feels like the levels are a little zoomed in, however, most notably on occasions where you're hanging from the ceiling and you can no longer see the floor, which of course makes dropping back down into the level a case of taking your life in your own hands. It's not Game Gear levels of problematic, but it is noticeable. This also made the teddy bear boss battle a bit more hit and miss because on the SNES, the boss disappears off the top of the screen on occasion, which makes working out where he'll strike next a more tedious hassle. Some of the level design is also slightly different on this version compared to the other ports. This was most apparent to me in the latter teddy bear level, where there are wall cannons firing at you as you navigate a vertical maze. On most versions, getting through the drops is a hassle because there are 3 cannons per drop. On the SNES, there's only 1. It makes that part of the game far less tricky and therefore far more fun, which is nice. Some of the collectibles are in different places throughout the game, and several enemies are redesigned, the most noticeable of course being Bertie Bassett now being a generic gingerbread man. But these don't change the way the game plays, they're just something that I've noticed while I was playing each port back to back. On the whole, the SNES has a brilliant, highly polished and thoroughly enjoyable port. I really like this one, and if you have a SNES, I recommend you give this version a try. So which version from the Nintendo stable would I recommend? Well, that's easy, the SNES version. There's absolutely no question about it, it is the best one. If you absolutely have to play it on the Game Boy, then go ahead, there's no problem with that. But if you want a good version of the game, it has to be the SNES. Now you might be wondering why there's no version for Nintendo's original console. Sega's 8-bit machine got a version, so why shouldn't Nintendo? Well, the answer to that is simple. James Bond 2 was coded in the UK, and here in the UK, the NES didn't do very well. As a result, it wouldn't make economic sense to have spent all that time and money coding a version for the NES. Sorry, NES fans, I'm sure it would have been a wonderful version of the game because after all, the Master System version was pretty good, but as I say, them's the breaks. Okay, on that bad news, let's move on and check out the home computer versions. Back in the late 8-bit and early into mid 16-bit era, there are a vast number of home computers available. Many publishers spread their nets far and wide during this era to try and reach as many consumers as possible, and with James Pond 2, that was no exception. I'm going to start by taking a look at the Commodore 64 version. It's the last of the 8-bit versions that I'm going to be covering because it's the only home computer port for the 8-bit systems as far as I can tell. The C64 fared fairly poorly with this port. The controls are horrendous, with James Bond being almost uncontrollable for most of the game. The reason for this is simple. The C64 had to take into account gamers with one-button joysticks, so either jump or stretch had to be mapped to a joystick direction instead of a button. The developers chose to map a jump to the up direction, which means it's very easy to keep jumping when you just want to move left or right. Consequently, it's a massive pain in the neck to be able to play the game on the C64, and the awful graphics don't help matters. This really does look like someone just coloured in the Game Boy version, shrank it in the wash so all the levels had to scroll vertically, and then slapped it on a cassette to upset Commodore owners. The sprites are ridiculously small, the controls are terrible, the screen scrolling makes the game annoying to play, and it's just not fun. It sounds decent though, I'll give it that. Let's move on. The first thing you'll notice when loading up the PC version is that it looks great. This is from the era of PC gaming when VGA graphics were starting to show what the IBM compatibles were capable of. PC gaming was coming into its own, and in a few years' time, the PC would start to push the Amiga off its pedestal. For now, however, the Amiga stood tall, and PC games bided their time with lovely displays like this one. That's not to say the game plays all that well, however. This is still a PC game from the early days of decent graphics. The raw processor power was still lagging behind, even on most 386 machines. As a result, James Pond 2 on PC looks great, but plays slowly. James just doesn't quite move right. There's a definite, noticeable lag to him. There's also no sound on my version, although that may be because I've messed up my settings. I can get sound on most games, and at this point, most games supported both the PC speaker and ad-lib sound cards at the very least, but this one didn't want to play along. A quick check on YouTube tells me that there should be sound, and it's actually pretty good sound too, but it's a sign of the times this game was made in that if you don't have your settings just right on your PC, you don't get any sound. It sucks, but that's how PCs were back in the day. The PC version contains extra levels, like this first one, which serves as an introduction to the basic movement systems in the game. Don't get your hopes up, however, as this is the best of the additional levels that I was able to reach. They aren't good, and they stick out from the proper levels like a sore thumb. So let's just put that aside and get to something else. If you're in your 30s or maybe early 40s and you went to school in the UK, you'll remember the Acorn Archimedes. These were the high-end RISC-based computers that schools used instead of jumping into all the problems associated with PCs in the early 90s. I liked them back in the day. They were really cool machines. Anyway, the Acorn Archimedes got a port of James Pond 2. It's pretty much a port of the PC version, from what I can tell, right down to the obnoxious extra levels. Now, I don't have an Archimedes myself, and I couldn't get an Archimedes emulator to run on my iMac. So all I can go off for this section is some YouTube footage on Stefan Lindberg's channel, link in the description below, but from what I saw, it looked nice and seemed to run smoothly, although every single level had to load individually from disk, so it's a bit of a pain. At least the PC version didn't have to do that. Since I can't actually run a copy of James Pond 2 on the Archimedes for you, I'm going to move on swiftly. Let's head back to a system that you are more likely to own if you dived into the 16-bit home computer market back in the day. Ah, the Atari ST, pioneer of the MIDI-enhanced home computers, powerhouse of graphics and gaming. What a machine, what a system. One of my friends had an ST, and he loved it. Everyone else had either an Amiga, like most of my friends did, or a PC, like I did. But we all looked at the Atari ST and said the same thing. What the hell is that thing, and why does its mouse look so weird? I'm serious here, that mouse is weird. Look, it's got a shelf on the back of it. Anyway, we aren't here to talk about the aesthetics of mouse design, we're here to see how this game plays. Let's get on with it. The game plays pretty well, to be honest. It looks and runs about the same as the Archimedes version, only without the obnoxious extra levels that don't fit with the game proper. The gradient background isn't quite as good. In fact, it's not so much a gradient as simply a load of coloured bands stretching across the level. But the gameplay is all here, and James handles as well as he does on the other systems. So I'm really happy with this version. It's decent, and it's very enjoyable. The music is decent too, although it does seem to be lacking something. I think it's because it's running a little slower than on the console version, and I'm not sure why. What I am sure of is that I somehow managed to record this footage without recording any sound at all, and that's unfortunate. Sorry about that. So there we have it, all the ports, both 8 and 16-bit. They're mostly pretty good, which is really good news because James Bond is a really good game, and it's a real shame when you find a port of a great game that isn't done very well. But although we've checked out all the ports, we're still not done here. James Bond 2, like the original game, was coded first on the Amiga, and then ported to pretty much everything that was under the sun. So, let's have a look at the original version. Oh baby, the Amiga, the powerhouse system that everyone wanted when I was a kid. Even I wanted one, despite having ultimately chosen the right side in the long run when I got my Mega PC. There's just something about the way the Amiga looks, how it handles, and how the games are so graphically stunning that makes you want one. Even now, I love the Amiga. So how does James Bond 2 handle on the Amiga, its original system? Well, you'll be happy to hear it's really good. The game is just so polished, so fun. Earlier on, I mentioned that Chris Sorrell spent the extra month he had compared to the development time for the Mega Drive version, tweaking and polishing things like the backgrounds. You can see that time was well spent. The parallax scrolling is smooth. The backgrounds are sometimes textured, sometimes animated. Just look at that snowstorm outside the mansion. It's brilliant. Gameplay-wise, the controls are wonderfully responsive, and the game just works so well. The music is top-notch and has a warmth to it that I've not really heard outside the Super Nintendo port. Everything looks right. Everything feels right. It plays right. I'm immensely impressed with this one. As a lead version, it definitely sets the standard, and I can't fault it. And that's pretty much it for James Bond's second outing. All in all, it's a fantastic game, and if you want to relive some classic cartoon mascot action, then you can do far worse than give this one a try.
That's not all of them though, is it?
James, how long have you been standing there?
Long enough to know you've missed a game.
I have? No, surely not.
Oh yes you have, and it's right up your alley too.
James Bond on the PlayStation 2. I must play it. Many games from the earlier generations found their way onto the PlayStation 2. Sony's behemoth was the dominant console of his generation, and everyone wanted a slice of that pie, no matter how well the game actually fit onto the system, or, as was often the case, didn't fit. This isn't just a straight port of the Amiga original, however. When Play It got the chance to re-release James Bond 2, they went all in. The game has 100 levels, double the original amount, and many of them are brilliant enhancements of the aesthetics of the original game. It's obvious to anyone who's played a lot of the original which levels are new, but if you're coming to the game fresh, you won't notice a difference. The boss battles make a welcome return, and they are still as much fun as they were before. Graphically, the game looks just as good as it did when it debuted on the Amiga, and the sound is wonderful too. Gone is the original level tune, to be replaced by a wonderful new track reminiscent of a spy drama. I love it. But don't worry, the brilliant Robocod remix title tune is still here, which is great. There are some other changes too. The original marketing deal with Penguin is long over, so you're no longer rescuing penguins. Now there's a new intro that shows Dr. Maybe kidnapping Santa's elves and tying them to explosives. You have to rescue the elves now, not the penguins. It makes the game tie more closely to its original Christmas theme. When you rescue an elf, you're shown a number on screen that tells you how many that there are left to rescue. That's useful on a lot of the larger levels where there are lots of elves to rescue, and it's easy to miss one. It's a nice touch that adds to the game, and I like it. What I don't like is the new camera. Why does it have to follow James so closely that whenever he walks over a bump in the platforms, and there are a lot of bumps in platforms, the camera rocks up and down? Okay, you might get used to that, but some of us can't, and if you can't, it's nausea-inducing. Play this with a sick bag nearby if you get motion sickness. I'm not joking. Until you get used to that constant bobbing on the screen, it's awful, and if you can't get used to it, it's game breaking. The original game didn't do this. This is a fault of the designers of this new port, and I cannot for the life of me explain why they would put that in there. The controls also seem a lot more slick. James is harder to control on this version than any other version I've played. It's easier to slide off the edge of a platform or miss the platform entirely when jumping. You'll get used to it eventually, but you shouldn't have to. It should have been fixed in the port. But these are the only issues I have with this game. The save function is a welcome addition, the 50 extra levels are a very welcome addition, the game looks huge and feels huge. It's a lot of fun to play, and it captures the essence of the original fantastically. And that's it. That's all the different versions of this game.
Not
It's
quite.
been... What?
Not quite.
What do you mean?
There's another one.
This better be good. Wow, it is. It really is. Released in 2005, the year before the PlayStation 2 iteration, James Pond 2 for the Nintendo DS is a wonderful homage to the classic game. Once again, there are new levels. Some were replicated in the PlayStation 2 version, while others are unique to this version of the game. The DS's dual screens are put to reasonable use here, with the upper screen showing production logos while the lower screen displays the intro sequence. This is exactly the same as the intro from the PlayStation 2 version, showing the new plotline of Dr. Maybe kidnapping elves. But oddly enough, the game then flips things around once you're into the game proper, as the upper screen takes precedence. The upper screen shows the game proper, while the lower screen shows you a basic map of the area you're in. It's not all that great because it doesn't show enemies, and it doesn't even show the whole level, but for a quick glance to get your bearings, it can be useful. It should have shown more of the whole level, however. That would have been far more useful. Gameplay-wise, this is essentially the same as the PS2 incarnation. James Pond doesn't quite jump as high here as he did on the PS2 version, which is most noticeable on the levels shared between the two versions, but other than that, it's a very good, fun game, and I enjoyed playing it a lot. The graphics are spectacular, and the game doesn't suffer the old problems of being on a handheld system. There's no zoom in here. The levels are presented at the size and viewing area that they were supposed to be. It's wonderful, I love it, and I think you'll love it too. So that's it, and I do mean it this time. 11 systems, 11 different versions of the game. And yes, I do know that I've missed out the CD32 and the AGA Amiga enhanced versions, but sorry, you're gonna have to forgive me. It's Christmas, and I want to spend some time with my family. So I skipped the two versions that are basically just the Amiga one with a few tweaks. Although I will admit, I do like the music and the soundtrack on the CD32 version, it's really good. But it's still just an upgraded version of the Amiga original. And the same goes for the AGA enhanced version. It's just the Amiga one, with better colours. So yeah, they're great games, but if you played the Amiga original, there's not really much to write home about here. So I thought it would be okay to just skip those ones. But anyway, that really is all we've got. 11 systems, and it's great. Unless you're looking at the Game Gear or Game Boy versions, you're going to have a really good time. James Bond 2 is a fantastic game that you can come back to time and time again. It's one of those brilliant mascot platformers from an era of fantastic mascot platformers, and it still stands out. So I can't recommend this one highly enough. And I really do think if you give it a try, and it's on one of the proper systems, not those original handhelds, but a proper system, you'll have a lot of fun with it too. Anyway, that's really all I've got time for today, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you did like this, and if you did, remember to click that like button. Share it with your friends so that they'll know a good game when they see it, and do subscribe for future videos, because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer on the Knobmouse channel, and I'll see you later. Today's video is brought to you by my graphic novels, The Collected Life of Knobty Mouse, Volume 1, All Over the House, Volume 1, and All Over the House, Volume 2. Thank you.